week 5 of the fantasy football season. His tight ends start to sit every matchup this week. San Francisco 49ers at the Los Angeles Rams. Jake Tongs is sit for me in this game. I know he's found the end zone a few times this season. He's going to come back sooner than later. He's not a main part of this offense's Tongs. He's found his way at times in the right place at the right time. But like I said, his ceiling isn't that high. And this week in the matchup at the Rams, I think it's going to be more of the skill players going out there making plays. Tyler Higbee, Davis Allen are sits. These guys are part of the offense, but a small part of it. Tyler Higbee, he made a couple catches last week. And Davis Allen, he had 2 touchdowns on the season. But obviously volume, consistency, and targets haven't been there, so they're both sits. Minnesota Vikings at the Browns International Bowl game. TJ Hawkinson to start. I know last week he didn't do anything. Was TJ Hawkinson 5.4 real fantasy points in PPR leagues. But I still don't think he's 100%. He might have rushed back from that ACL injury last season. And now him and Carson Wentz have to build rapport and trust. So I think it's going to take a little bit of time. But this week we know they're going to try to take Justin Jefferson out with Denzel Ward on him a majority of this game. And TJ Hawkinson's going to have to work the middle of the field and make plays. So I think this week's a bounce-back week. David Njoku, Harold Fannin Jr. are fringe options. Now the rookie Dylan Gabriel is going to get a start in this ball game, and it's a tough matchup versus this Minnesota defense. I know last week Minnesota couldn't stop Kenneth Gainwell and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Metcalf had a big 80-yard touchdown, but this week I think they bounce back this defense, and it's going to be tough sledding. And now these guys got to build a rapport, especially David Njoku with Gabriel, where I thought Njoku would have better stats at the start of the year with Flacco, but obviously that hasn't been the case. So they're 2 fringe options. Dallas Cowboys at the New York Jets. Jake Ferguson, he's been a target machine over the last few weeks, and especially now with CeeDee Lamb out of the lineup. Pretty much George Pickens and Ferguson, the top 2 targets in this Cowboy offense. So Jake Ferguson, he's going to get a lot of targets. He's the big red zone threat of Dak Prescott, and this Cowboy team likes him a lot that they gave him an extension in training camp. So he's a start versus a Jet defense that can't stop anyone, and gave Waller 2 touchdowns last week. Mason Taylor a sit, but definitely someone to own in 12-team leagues or deeper. He had a breakout game last week as the rookie, 5 catches, 65 yards at the Miami Dolphins. And like I said, this Cowboy defense can't stop anyone, but Mason Taylor have to see another week or 2 before he's in the lineup. New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints. Theo Johnson a sit. Last week he found the end zone. Is Theo Johnson. And now with Malik Neighbors out for the season, his target's going to be split up between Darius Slayton, Theo Johnson, and maybe Wan'Dale Robinson in this New York Giant offense. But the track record hasn't been there for Theo Johnson. Just like Mason Taylor, young tight end in the league, have to see a little bit more out of him. But obviously someone to keep on the radar. Juwan Johnson to start. Last week was the worst game of the year for Johnson this season, where the first 3 weeks of the season he started off with double-digit fantasy points. And this week it's a pretty decent matchup with the Giants coming in. And Juwan Johnson is better player at home than he's been on the road as well. And I think the Saint offense in terms of fantasy points for their players is better at home than it is on the road. So Johnson, I'll give the start. Vegas Raiders at the Indianapolis Colts. Brock Bowers, he hasn't been the same since week 1, since he tweaked that knee. And he's been playing with a bulky knee brace. And him and Geno Smith haven't been on the same page. But Brock Bowers, we know he's a freak tight end. We know he's a matchup problem. And if they just could get him in the right positions and him and Geno get the chemistry down, he could be back to putting up the big numbers he was putting up. Indianapolis, he's a start. Tyler Warren a start. Last week we even saw a rushing touchdown in that game from Tyler Warren. So he's a very talented tight end. One of the better tight ends to come out in the NFL draft in the last decade. And he was a 14th overall pick for a reason. So him and Daniel Jones have a good rapport. They line him up in different formations, at fullback at times as well, where he had that rushing touchdown. And this week, in a good matchup versus a bad rated defense, he's a must-start. Miami Dolphins at the Panthers. Darren Waller came out of retirement. He was hurt pretty much all training camp. Missed the first 3 weeks of the season. And then last week, a big ball game with 2 touchdowns versus the New York Jets. And now with Tyreek Hill out for the season with the knee injury, he's going to get more targets as Darren Waller. He's a big red zone and end zone threat. And this week at the Carolina Panthers, let's say plays limited snaps once again, I still think Waller could be productive. Because remember, believe it or not, this guy was a top tight end for 2 or 3 seasons in fantasy football going back 3-4 years ago. Tommy Trimble will start for the Panthers. I know he found the end zone last week, but this Panther offense, you really can't trust anyone week in and week out besides Chuba Hubbard and Ted McMillan. So Trimble maybe could build on the good game he had last week, and it's a good matchup versus the Dolphins, but he's not a tight end I would trust this week. Denver Broncos at the Philadelphia Eagles. Evan Ingram a sit. Evan Ingram so far, he really hasn't done much for this Denver Bronco team. Injuries have been a problem, and him just not getting open and making plays in the Sean Payton offense. Evan Ingram, he could turn things around. There's a chance of that, but I just don't see it this week at the Philadelphia Eagles, where we know there's one of the better defenses in the league. And Evan Ingram, like I said, most likely not 100% playing with that calf injury. And Bo Nix, he's targeting guys like Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and even Troy Franklin over him so far this season. Dallas Goedert to start. Goddard, one of the better tight ends in fantasy football, and he's moving up the pecking order in this offense. He's had a better fantasy season than A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, believe it or not. And we know Goddard missed week 2's ball game, so Goddard's going out there. Him and Jalen Hurts are locked in. Last week he had 2 good plays in the red zone and found the end zone. And this week, in a matchup versus Denver, where we know Surtain's going to be on A.J. Brown, they're going to take him out of the game. I think Goddard, once again, the middle of the field is going to be open, and he's a good start. Houston Texans at the Baltimore Ravens. Dalton Schultz is sit for me in this game. He's definitely operating as the number 2 option in this passing game, but his ceiling just isn't high, Dalton Schultz. He's pretty much a tight end. You got to rely, obviously, on a touchdown, because yard after catch, that's pretty non-existent. Big playmaking abilities non-existent. He definitely has good hands at the tight end position, but not someone who's going to go out there and break tackles and obviously get those extra yards. Mark Andrews a start. Now with Cooper Rush in there, quarterback, this is going to be more of a traditional offense the next couple weeks here. Cooper Rush, not really a mobile quarterback, in the pocket guy. He's got a good arm, has a good IQ, and I think Mark Andrews is going to benefit with Cooper Rush in there, quarterback. We saw last season Jake Ferguson, and even going back a few years ago when Rush was in there, quarterback, have some good ball games. So Andrews this week, after the first 2 weeks non-existent, the last 2 weeks going out there and playing well, he's a start. Tennessee Titans at the Cardinals. Chigga Kwangwo is sit. He's been too inconsistent for too many seasons. And this offense pretty much has nothing going on, and Cam Ward even admitted it in the post-game presser. Much is not good at all, Cam Ward said. So Chigga Kwangwo a sit. Trey McBride to start. Obviously, top 2 tight end off the board in fantasy drafts, even though I think his numbers are a little bit underwhelming, but weekly, at worst case, you could pencil him in anywhere from 10, 12 fantasy points is Trey McBride. So this week in a good matchup, and Arizona back home, he's a must start. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Seattle Seahawks. Cade Otton's a sit. You would think last week he would have stepped up a little bit as Cade Otton. When Mike Evans out and Chris Godwin, they were trying to ease him in, even though Godwin did end up with 10 targets. So Cade Otton last year had a couple big games here and there, but this season pretty much not getting targeted and not making plays. He's a sit. A.J. Bonner a sit. Even though A.J. Bonner, he's been more involved in this offense over the last couple weeks, and he's found the end zone a couple times as well this season is Bonner. But like I said, consistency hasn't been there throughout his career, and he's in there more of a blocking tight end at times than a receiver. But like I said, this season, Sam Darnold has utilized A.J. Bonner pretty well, but still, I wouldn't trust him in fantasy. A sit. Elijah Arroyo a sit as well. They're running a lot of 2 tight end sets. Elijah Arroyo, he's an athletic tight end where he pretty much looks like a big wide receiver out there, the way he can run routes and make plays. Elijah Arroyo, in the limited snaps we've seen him this season. But this week, like I said, it's been limited snaps, and Bonner's been the better tight end. He's a sit. Detroit Lions at the Bengals. Sam Laporta start, but Sam Laporta, since week 1, hasn't reached double-digit fantasy points. He's pretty much not doing anything in this offense. And the 2 top guys, obviously, in this offense are Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs, where the other guys are the supporting cast, and they'll get numbers here and there, but we've seen Jameson Williams' numbers go down, and obviously Sam Laporta's go down. But this week, if he's going to time to redeem himself, it's in a great matchup versus a bad defense in Cincinnati. Mike Gesicki is sit. No one pretty much has fantasy value at all besides Jamar Chase, even though his numbers have dropped off drastically over the last couple weeks since Browning's been in the offense. So this week, Gesicki not doing much at all this season, and a tough matchup. Easy sit. Commanders at the Chargers. Zach Ertz to start. Jaden Daniels most likely returning in this ball game for the Commanders, and he's been the number 2 option for Jaden Daniels in the security blanket, and also a young quarterback's best friend is the tight end position. So this week in a matchup at the Chargers, where they did give up a touchdown to the tight end Theo Johnson last week, I think Ertz could go out there, have a low yardage game, but possibly find the end zone. Now to the Chargers, Andre Gatson, Tyler Conklin to sit. Gatson a couple weeks ago had a good ball game versus the Denver Broncos, 5 catches, 46 yards. And then last week they didn't do much. And I've said this in other videos, this Charger team, they really haven't utilized the tight end position much over the last few seasons. And Tyler Conklin used more as a blocker than a pass catcher, even though he's a decent pass catcher, I think, at the tight end position. Conklin, he's a sit. In the final 2 games of the week, Sunday night, New England Patriots at the Buffalo Bills. Hunter Henry, he's a start. He's arguably the number 1 option in the passing game for Drake May in this New England Patriot team. Last week he found the end zone, was Hunter Henry, and they know they got to put points on the board if they want to compete with this Bill team. Dalton Kincaid to start. Arguably, he's that number 2 option in this passing game behind Khalil Shakir, and he's been a touchdown guy this season, is Dalton Kincaid. I know last week the touchdown saved his day. The week before, he almost had 2 touchdowns. One was batted out on that Thursday night game versus the Miami Dolphins. But Kincaid, he was a high draft pick going back a couple years ago in the back end of the first round. So him and Allen have worked on rapport, and they're making plays. So this week versus New England, he's a start. And the final game, Monday night, Kansas City Chiefs at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Travis Kelce, his numbers have been underwhelming the last couple weeks here. I know week 1 he had a nice breakaway touchdown. In that one was Travis Kelce, but pretty much he's taken a back seat. And I've said this in other videos. It wouldn't be surprising if this is the last season here for Travis Kelce. But this week in a good matchup at Jacksonville, if it's any time for him as well to go out there, have a big performance, it will be this week. Bright lights Monday night and a good matchup. And now Brenton Strange, he's a start for me. Strange, he's going out there, most consistent guy in this offense in terms of catching the football and getting targeted. Brian Thomas Jr. having a down sophomore season so far, scared of contact in the middle of the field or whatever the case, and having drop problems. Where Strange, he's doing a little bit of everything and moving the chains for this Jaguar team. And this week they know they're going to have to put points on the board if they want to pull the upset, and Strange could be in for a decent game. So that's tight end starts at every matchup for week 5 of the fantasy football season.